All right, we are going to now talk about watersheds. This unit, like I told you, is very out of order. Out of order is not the right even word. It's very jumpy all over the place. So now we're talking about watersheds, and I'm not even sure where I'm going to stick this part of the class of the unit into our instruction, but we're going to talk about it. It's important. Watersheds are important, and we are going to go to the Watershed Conservancy and do a field trip there this year as well, which is always beneficial. So, watersheds are important parts of the ecosystem, and you need to understand the characteristics of watershed, identify it, and what causes them to be divided based on certain things. So, watersheds are an area of a land that drains into a specific body of water. We live in the Delaware Bay watershed. So, all of the rivers that are around us eventually empty out into the Delaware Bay. So, the Perkiomen Creek is going to go into the Schuylkill goes into the Delaware, and the Delaware goes into the Delaware River. Now, if you go further inland in Pennsylvania, so if you've driven towards Pittsburgh, you're going to notice that it's going to say you're entering the Chesapeake Bay watershed. That's because the rivers then in that area are going to drain into the Chesapeake Bay and not into the Delaware Bay. So, the watershed is always determined by the slope of the land, the ridges of the land, and how they divide watersheds. So, think of a mountain. Okay. Think of a mountain, and if this is the high point, right, all of the water on this side of the mountain is going to drain into this river, and all of the water that's on that side of the mountain is going to drain into the river on the other side. So, that watershed is a little bit different. So we are in a watershed, the Perkiomen watershed. If you go a little bit further, based on the slopes of the land, you'll enter into other watersheds, the Schuylkill River watershed, things like that. The vegetation, the soil composition, and the slope all play a large role in how the watershed drains. So if you have more watersheds more plants, you're going to have more infiltration of that water and then more groundwater recharge. So vegetation means less runoff. Vegetation is good because most of the water that we use is not surface water. Most of the water that we use is going to be groundwater. So if you have lots of vegetation, it's going to slow the water down. It's going to get absorbed by the plants. It's going to soak into the soil, and then it's going to slowly infiltrate through the soil down into the groundwater and then recharge the groundwater underneath. If you have a higher slope, that means you're going to have faster velocity of water, meaning more runoff and more soil erosion. So that's going to make your water in the surface, your surface water is a little bit more dirty. And then soil permeability, it all depends on the type of soil that you have. Um, if you have soil that's low permeability, meaning water doesn't infiltrate through it very quickly, like we have a lot of clay here, that means that that's going to impact runoff and infiltration rates. So you might notice around here that it gets to a certain point with rain that the water stops absorbing into the soil. That's because we have low permeability, so the water doesn't easily filter through our soils. So those three things are going to impact, watersheds as well as water running off, and then also the health of our local streams and rivers. Human activities of a watershed can also impact water quality. So, the types of agriculture that are there, if you have cities, if you have clear cutting, urbanization, dams, mining, construction happening around it, all of those things can impact the quality of the surface water. Okay. So, when we talk about watersheds, we're focusing really on the surface water, not necessarily the infiltration of the groundwater. The Chesapeake Bay watershed is one of the largest watersheds that in the Mississippi, but you'll notice that we're actually over here in Pennsylvania. So ours actually empties, that's the Delaware Bay right there. Ours is actually going to empty into the Delaware River. But anything west sort of Harrisburg is going to drain into the Chesapeake Bay. The Chesapeake Bay creates a mix of fresh and salt water, and it's high in nutrients and sediment that make it what we call a salt marsh. The water is what we call brackish. So that means a little bit salty, a little bit fresh. It's highly productive, meaning it's very good for fish. It's very good for birds. It's very good for invertebrates. All of those things make the bay highly productive. We have lots of marshes and wetlands surrounding the Chesapeake Bay. So estuaries and wetlands can provide lots of ecosystem services. And we're going to talk about ecosystem services too a little bit later in the year. Some of those services are tourism revenue. So people want to go, they want to fish on the bay. Water filtration. So wetlands are going to trap pollutants and reduce the amount of pollutants that are getting into the water. It's also providing habitats for food sources, so habitats for fish and crabs, and then also storm protection. Wetlands actually absorb lots of water. It allows to like buffer for floods. So swamps and wetlands are very good at absorbing a lot of water and reducing the amount that floods over into the local surrounding areas and communities. Humans obviously have a negative impact on the Chesapeake Bay, and we're going to come back to eutrophication multiple times throughout the year. But nutrient pollution, specifically nitrates and phosphates, are going to lead to what we call eutrophication, which is just an algal bloom because the algae has an increase of nutrients, nitrates and phosphates. And because the algae is like bursting. And if you ever see like a creek, well, usually it's in moving water, but if you ever, or still water, if you ever see like a pond or the edges of a stream and it's all green and gooky, that's algae. It's usually because there's runoff from local areas, nitrates and phosphates. When that happens, though, the sunlight is blocked from below the surface. Okay. And the sunlight that gets blocked that causes the plants below the surface to die. And the bacteria that are in the water are going to decompose those plants that are dying. And they're using up lots of oxygen. That oxygen that gets used up creates this dead zone because there's low oxygen. It creates high biological oxygen demand, or what we call BOD, and low available dissolved oxygen. So when you have algal blooms, you have this drastic increase in how much oxygen you need because of those bacteria. So how much biological oxygen demand you have versus how much oxygen is actually available. And because the plants are dying, the plants create oxygen, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy over and over again. So some of the things, residential runoff, farms and livestock, urban runoff, there's lots of things that can contaminate and increase nitrates and phosphates. The biggest one we see is from sewage treatment plants, nitrates and phosphate levels that come from human waste. Animal waste from CAFOs, that's confined animal feeding operations, or as you know it, factory farms. And then synthetic fertilizers from agricultural fields, but also from your lawn. So if you are getting your lawn treated by True Green or Green Thumb Lawn or whatever they're called, those fertilizers that they're putting on your lawn to make them nice and green also run off into our creeks, and then that can also contribute to eutrophication. Other major pollutants include endocrine disruptors, and we'll dive into that mess later. That comes from your sewage treatment. Sediment pollution, that's usually because when you have erosion, the soil is going to run off with that erosion. And then that sediment pollution is going to increase turbidity, which is the how well you can see through the water. And that increase in turbidity is going to then negatively impact the aquatic ecosystems. And we're going to talk all about that when hopefully we go to the watershed this year. So clear cutting is one of the biggest things that has a negative impact on our watersheds. Whoops, I clicked too fast. So the first thing is soil erosion. Soil erosion is caused by the loss of those root structures. So plants are going to anchor soil in place. And so when you take large areas of forest away, you are then decreasing the amount of roots that are available to hold that soil in place. It also removes soil and organic matter from decomposing, so that's going to negatively impact the health of the soil. And then as it rains, those sediments are more likely to run off and then land in the water. It's going to increase the temperature of the water and make it more turbid or cloudy. We talked about turbidity on the slide before. So it's going to look more like this, that dirty brown looking water, and that's because of the runoff from the land. It increases the soil and stream temperatures, so there's no shades there. So that shade is then going to increase the temperature of the soils. And the loss of tree shade along the rivers and streams is also going to warm the water there. And then that extra sediment also warms the water because it makes the water darker, and then the water absorbs more heat. So some of the solutions to those pollutants that we just talked about, you could try to use things like cover crops. So in your farms, you actually plant crops in between or that are growing when you're not harvesting. That will keep soil in place. Something like a riparian buffer. A riparian buffer is just a strip of wooded or planted area that has plant life that's going to help hold the soil in place as the water may possibly run off. So it can include trees and bushes and things like that. Usually you see trees because they have harder, hardier roots. Animal manure management. So just eliminating the use of CAFOs and how they're getting rid of waste at farms. And then making sure septic tanks are upgraded and we have, nutrient removal at our water treatment plants. All of these things are things that we have the ability to do. It's just that the cost tends to be difficult for people to afford. Okay, so for your free response question here, the question is, please can you identify one change that can occur in the water quality of streams within a watershed that has been deforested and explain how deforestation can lead to this change. Please make sure that you're connecting the change in the water quality directly to the deforestation. If you don't do that, then you're not really answering the question. Okay? You guys have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow.